But no, when you talk, we've talked about family, we've talked about the military, we've talked about business and leadership. I think just one core thing is it's really easy to get fixated on everything else around us. But remember that, hey, it starts with you, man. Like, but it's not about you. Meaning the only thing you have control over is kind of your intention. We don't even control our own health, right? Like I could get diagnosed with cancer tomorrow.
Yeah.
I trip down the stairs. I'm getting old. Maybe I'll break a hip. Like who knows? But I control my attitude. I control how I choose to interpret the events at me. So it starts with you, but it's not about you. And if you can tap into, a purpose that's bigger than yourself. And I'm not saying like, hey, we've all got to be Malala or, it's not all about position and changing the world and fame, but like, hey, what is your niche? What do you love? What do you got some talent, some gifts, some passion for? And where's that opportunity to live it? Like you can tap into that and just go full bore down that road because it plays out family life, business life, personally across the realm. When you have a clearly articulated purpose and you got defined values, that's going to resonate through everything.
Let's keep rocking with this train of thought right here. I love this. So
yeah, hit it.
Obviously, hockey players can whip some ass, and I've seen them take some shots to their teeth and they get right back up and their mouths are bleeding and they go back out there and score some goals, man. You've obviously done some incredible things in your life and scored a lot of proverbial life goals. And I couldn't be more excited to have you here, brother. I'm glad that our guy Steve was able to make the connection there. But obviously, a journey is a journey. And I like to start the show with someone bringing us up to speed with their journey. You can start where you want, how you want, and take me on it with you. And when you feel it's time that you're compelled to slow down, let your foot off the gas a little bit, apply the brake, or however you see fit, man, I will have a lot to pick up from there. So feel free to start to fill us in, man, on the process of your life thus far, brother.
All right, man. I'll let you grab a coffee, a popcorn. We'll let Jesus take the wheel and see where this goes. So.
I got my bubbly, brother. I'm ready.
Nice. Oh, awesome. Yeah, so let's see. My story began like a lot of folks. I was born at a very young age, originally in Eastern Canada. And dad was a pastor and mom was a stay-at-home mom. I had 4 brothers and sisters, so, 5 kiddos. I was the youngest by 7 years. I was definitely an afterthought, which was ironic because my mom had no issues letting me know that. She's like, yeah, we really didn't expect you. We'll deal with it, but you were not part of the plan. So I had kind of an interesting childhood. I think probably everyone did, being the youngest of 5 and having some kind of wild siblings. I got away with anything because my parents were focused on the older kids. And I ended up actually leaving home at 16. I was in kind of an unusual small school, rural Canada setup, and it just wasn't working for me. And I was 16 and had all the answers. So I left home, which actually consisted of me living with one brother and then another brother. So it's not like I was, on the streets, but just trying to figure life out, dropped out of school, thought I knew better. And one thing led to another and I ended up joining the Canadian Army on my 17th birthday. That's when I first walked into their office, said, hey, I want to do this, not really knowing what this is. But up to this point, not a ton of direction or drive in my life. Wasn't really big into sports. I did play hockey for a few years. I was mediocre on my best days. It's like Canada. So it's like saying it's playing hockey in Canada is the equivalent of breathing in any other country. Like you're just expected to do it.
That's what you
part
do.
Of life.
Yeah.
So I was by no means a standout athlete there. But I go in the Canadian Army and all of a sudden this kid who didn't have a whole lot of direction, drive, focus falls into a structured system where the leaders there really didn't care what your backstory was. They didn't care what you thought you could do. They were just like, hey, this is the standard. This is the job. Execute. And if you don't think you can do it, we're going to put a boot in your ass until you do it. It's like 1991. So we're quite as touchy-feely sensitive as we are today. So they're just like, yeah, suck it up, buttercup. Here's the standard. So all of a sudden I realized, hey, when failure is not an option, I can perform, decent. I can meet the standard or exceed it. And I kind of like that feeling, is this feeling of self-efficacy. However, it's the early 90s. I actually am a dual citizen. My mom's from Louisiana. And I'm in the Canadian Army, starting to figure stuff out. I actually knock out my high school, kind of get my Canadian GED equivalent. And then there's these awesome commercials from the US Army. People are doing wheelies on motorbikes off the back of helicopters. They're paddling rafts and swamps, night vision. I turn around and look at the Canadian Army. There's like 11 of us. We have 4 guns. I'm like, man, those commercials look pretty sweet.
Yeah.
And so I come down and I joined the US Army. I think I was technically still in the Canadian Reserves when I joined the US Army. So now I come to the US Army. I'm enlisted. It's pretty easy. I mean, I've played this game before. I sort of know how it goes. Shut up, work hard, stay in shape and you'll excel. And yeah, I enjoyed it. I went to Germany. I was an infantry soldier and it was pretty mellow. Then I came back to the US stateside after a couple years and I was a paratrooper. And again, none of it was particularly hard. But I had leaders there that were like, hey, man, you've got more to give. Like, you ever think about becoming an officer?
Wow.
And I was like, no, not really. Your job looks frankly kind of boring. This was before email, but they still did a lot of paperwork. And I knew they didn't get to do as much of the fun stuff as I did. And then they showed me the pay scales. And I'm like, actually, that doesn't look like too bad of a job.
Yeah, right.
So, because these leaders who kind of nudged and pushed me, I threw in a packet and I get picked up for an ROTC program at Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington. And that was really neat because there I got to see, learn a lot about leadership in that program. But Gonzaga as an institution had a really strong culture, both academically and kind of where they fit in the community. They're very service oriented, kind of Jesuit based school. And then also the culture of their basketball team was just starting to get formed. This was the late 90s. So right when they started to pop into the NCAA tournament. And a lot of it was, their success that really began there in earnest was culture based. It wasn't any one individual player. It was an institution that subscribed to a higher set of values. And I think it really got embodied by a coach they had come on, I think in 99, Mark Few. He was an assistant, but then he became the head coach, once they started to hit big time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of neat to see. That was just one of those like bookmark in your head, like, okay,
sure.
You can build a culture that is bigger than any one star athlete and it can produce sustained success. And I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. I come back in the military. Now I'm an officer. And again, now I am the leader, right? I go from being someone who, just has to do what they're being told. And now I have to figure out how to, inspire, motivate, direct, guide, listen to, communicate with, et cetera, with these other, performers. And there was wins and losses. This was pre 9/11, so we hadn't been going to war yet, but we're sliding towards that. None of us realized it at the time. And then I have a leader who, again, is like, hey, man, this guy had known me for years. He knew me back when I was a lower enlisted kid. He's like, Phil, you're doing great here as an infantry officer. You're figuring it out. It's like, I think you should look into special operations. And I'm like, how come every time I get comfortable, someone pokes me? But I really respected this guy. And he gave me some advice that I loved. He goes, his name is, retiring as a 4-star general, but his name is John Nicholson.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of my top 3 or top 4 leaders I've ever worked with. And he goes, Phil, where your passion and your talent intersect, he's like, that's where you really want to focus your life. He goes, there's a sweet spot there. I remember we had this conversation because he was a pretty senior leader. And it was just, one evening, everyone had left for the day. And I was still in like our little platoon office, cleaning things up or, doing elf bowling or whatever the heck I was doing. And he just sort of stuck his head in and we had a conversation. But that stuck with me now, 20 some years later. And so I was like, all right, what's it hurt to apply to go to Ranger Regiment? It's a special operations organization. I'll throw my name in the hat and we'll see where it goes. So I got picked up. I went to their selection. I get hired. And now, we're post 9/11 era. Now, when you go places, there's a good chance you're actually going to deploy to war. And if you're in special operations, you definitely are. So as a Ranger, all of a sudden, I went to kind of being, a pretty good performer in an okay group to all of a sudden I was average in a very high performing group. Like everyone was was pushing their limits. I wouldn't say everyone, but the vast majority are really, getting after it. They're excelling, whether it's tactically or personally, professionally, all these realms, and we're getting tested in combat over and over. Like, hey, are you really as good as you think you are? Okay, let's see how that plays out in Afghanistan. See how it plays out in Iraq. I had the honor to serve alongside some incredible people. One of them being Pat Tillman,
Wow.
the professional football player.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Bravo Company. He was an Alpha Company, but he was one of those people that really leave an impression on your life. And it's interesting because I still receive threads and stuff. He passed away, almost 20 years ago will be his anniversary here in 5 days, when he died, the 22nd, I think it was. But he continues to have a legacy and an
Sure
impact.
does.
And,
Yeah.
and he did when he was alive, and he does now, 20 years after he's left us. But those are some of the caliber of folks I was able to work with. And that was awesome. But I remember I'd been in the military 8 years. My wife was pregnant. I'm on the side of a mountain in Afghanistan. And I get word that my mother-in-law, who's extremely close to, died kind of
Wow.
rather suddenly. And I remember being on a satellite phone. It was breaking in and out. And I'm talking to my wife, and it keeps hanging up because we're on the side of a mountain, early 2000s technology. We literally had walked there, and we were at a point where our altitude was so high that helicopters had a hard time getting up there, and even when they
Wow.
did, they couldn't lift a whole lot. So it
Sure.
was pretty austere conditions. And I get word that my mother-in-law, who I was close to, had kind of passed away, and I'm like, this sucks. Yeah, it hurts me personally, but what really bothered me is like, man, I want to be there for my wife in
Yeah.
this tough time, and I
Absolutely.
couldn't be, and I knew I wouldn't be for a few more months.
Mm.
Um, and I made a decision like, hey, I think, I'm going to take a break from the military. Let me focus on my family. We've got a kiddo inbound. Let me just see how that plays out. So I got out for about a year and a half, worked as a civilian, middle management written all over me. And it was all right. Like a lot of the leadership things I had learned in the military still applied to civilian life, but it wasn't as fulfilling. And one of the things I noticed was the company had a great culture on paper. That's actually what drew me to them. Like, people first and this
Mm.
and that and integrity.
Mm.
And I'm like, yeah, I can get behind that. But then in practice and in structure, it was all about the bottom line. It's
Yep.
like, hey, we need you to cut 4 people off your team this week. Don't care who or how, just do it. We need to hit our numbers. Hey, we're going to do this kind of thing in the gray to generate some additional income. Again, it was all about the numbers. And, at the end of the day, if I did an amazing job, our share price maybe went up 1/100th of a cent or something, probably less than that. But we weren't changing the world. At the same time, I was still losing friends, at a pretty regular interval overseas. And so I remember sitting in my office going, is it about money? Is it about, position, or is there something else to life? And I'm like, I don't know what it is, but this is not my place. And so I fought my way back in the military. I say fought my way back in because it was ironic. It was actually really hard to get back in. And the ironic part was this was in 04, 05, 06. They were pulling people back into the military who had gotten out, not who volunteered, but they just were pulling them because, you still had time left on this kind of contract, this little clause in your recruiting contract. So they were pulling those folks in, I wouldn't say against their will, but who were not
Hmm.
volunteering. And they're
Wow.
like, hey, we need you back. Manny, come on in.
Right. Right.
And we need another 2 years out of you. And then I was trying to come in. Like, I'm like, hey, I've deployed 3 times. I was Ranger. I was this. I was that. Put me in, coach. And they're like, we don't have a good system for people who want to come in, but we're really good at pulling in people who don't want to come in. So it's just typical military. It's
Wow.
ironic.
Yeah. Wow.
So one thing led to another. Actually, the same guy who told me to go to Ranger Regiment, John Nicholson was, higher rank at this point. He's a full bird colonel. He's in 10th Mountain Division, and he has some people basically help expedite getting me back in. So now I'm back in the military. I'm back in my comfort zone. I feel like, okay, I'm going to be heading to combat here soon, leading troops again. And while I'm coming back in, someone who is a Green Beret major is like, hey, man, have you ever thought about going the special forces route. And I'm like, I thought about it, but then I got out and I think I missed my timing. It's not going to happen. And he goes, no, you should throw your name in the hat to, try out for Green Beret training. So here we go again. Someone sees more potential in you than you see in yourself. And I'm like, well, whatever. If nothing else, it'll give me some motivation to work out a little extra harder. I'll probably meet some good people and maybe learn something about myself. Throw my name in the hat. Next thing you know, now I'm in 1st Special Forces Group as an A-team commander, an ODA team commander. And that was a, entirely different experience. So I go from leading Rangers in, groups of 50 or whatever, and, second in command of a company with maybe 150 of them, to now I've got this tiny team of, 8 to 12, depending on the time and place. And you're off on your own, you're leading them in very austere conditions, and you're working by, with, and through locals. And that was a super cool job. And I did that for 3 years. And again, served alongside some amazing people, lost some good friends, went around the world, learned a heck of a lot. And, both from successes and failures. And when I'm comfortable, someone else goes, hey, you're doing a great job as an SF team leader. But now this other person's name was General Miller. And he's like, hey, you ever think about throwing your name in the hat to serve at some different levels within the military? I'm like, all right, I'll give it a shot. And sure enough, that path just continues on and on. Now, at one point, I end up from where I'm leading in special operations to get to a point where I was actually in charge of kind of helping bring in leaders within these organizations and then training them. So you're taking mid-level accomplished senior leaders and going, now I'm the one going, hey, have you ever thought about serving at a higher level? You're a really good SEAL, Green Beret, Ranger, whatever. There's more to give, more to do. How do you train and equip those people to serve at the next level? And I was privileged to have that job, which was really cool, because when I ended up leaving the military in 2019, you realize those same principles that, worked, whether it was the military or combat or building organizations, and I've got everything from like Gonzaga University basketball to the Green Berets and everything in between. You start seeing those principles really still apply. A purpose-driven, value-based leader in an organization that has a culture that's designed for long-term legacy and success, it works. Again, whether it's athletics, business, nonprofit, military, choose your venue. The principles are the same. It just looks very different in different environments. And so that's kind of what I'm doing today, with my current organization, Stonewater Training, where we're taking a lot of those principles and trying to, apply it to different teams, different businesses. And the ones who do it, you just watch go off the charts, whether it's an individual leader or an organization collectively. So I've talked a whole bunch. You patiently listen. I'm going to pause there, man. I know I kind of all over the place on you.
It's my job to patiently listen, man. But believe me, trust me, in that I caught a lot of, you're driving down the highway, man. You see these wonderful big bright billboards there, and the ones that are like that, you're like, oh, that's a good one. And then you drive other ones, you're like, you don't even pay attention to it. So you gave me a lot of big bright billboards that I could pay attention to there. Something that stood out to me that you said there, a couple things. A lot of leadership in terms of the word usage there, leadership. The other thing is that you said something in there that made a big difference in me wanting to ask this question, which was the difference between you seeing an organization talking about what the principle or the value is on a surface level, but then in practice, they're not following through on that. And the third thing that I want to highlight here is what would it be? The structure and the system of the military that can take somebody off the street. And I've heard a lot of stories of people that have, in your case, like you said, no direction, not sure where you're going, you want to figure life out, you're young, you really don't have much understanding of life except for that it all at those, later teenage years. And then you go into the military and they shape the shit out of you and you come out a man. Or if you're a woman, you come out a woman, right? And so I'm going to go with all of those in a second. But the first question is, on that last one, is what is it about the military and the system and the structure and the purpose of it that allows for something like that to happen. What happens when they absorb you in and start to put you through their grinder that makes it so that it's almost like, I mean, again, I'm sure there are efforts where it doesn't work out and people quit and they fall out, right? But for some reason, it probably is more likely that people stay in it and they get trained properly and they get brought through the gauntlet accordingly and they turn out to be great humans and they understand values and principles. I would love for you to speak on top of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just having that structure, right? Where people come in, they do a good job of guiding / forcing the individual to divorce their ego. Meaning, when you come in the military, they make a point. We've all seen the movies. The recruits show up and the drill sergeants are in their face.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably a little tamer than that now. Or maybe I'm just a little more calloused. But so first and foremost is they do a really good job of helping the individual divorce themselves from their ego. Not yourself, but your ego, meaning, hey, I'm special. It's about me. What do I want? What can I do? Also, that fear of what other people think. They do a good job of stripping that from you.
How?
Now,
I'm going to jump in. I got to probe on those. So how? I hear it. I mean, I get it, right? Do they put you through, is this where the, what do you guys call it? The, oh, geez, why am I drawing a blank on the
basic training, boot camp,
boot camps?
indoctrination.
Correct. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, they literally take, they physically take a lot of your identity from you. You're not wearing the clothes you want. You're not getting up what you want, when you want. You're not doing what you want. Your hair's shaved. You're eating what everyone else eats. It's not about you.
Interesting.
It's about the team. It's about the military. It goes beyond that. It's about the nation. I think when you get the instructors who do a really good job, there's different levels, right? There's first me as an individual, kind of that selfish, comfort-seeking part of me that, leads down a path that's really not very fulfilling. But then there's my family, my team, my business, my community. It keeps scoping out. When I'd see the instructors in the military and the special operations, I thought did a really good job of this. People tend to think it's, the guys, guys and gals who shoot the best and are the fittest and this and that. And I would argue, I go, no, they probably have the clearest vision of higher purpose, why they do what they do.
That's
Meaning they know it's not even like, as a Green Beret, it wasn't about my SF team. It was beyond that. It wasn't about my group. It wasn't about the Army. It's about the nation and the values that undergird it. That's why we served. That's why we lived. That's why we fought. That's why we died.
Wow.
And so when you go into training, people kind of beat you down. They go, Manny, we don't really care what you want. It's not about you, man. You're serving on something bigger. Now, at the most elementary level, as an 18-year-old, you look around and you realize, okay, these other 30 people, that's who it's for. Like, that's your world. And so now, whether you don't want to let them down or you don't want to stand out, you start conforming to the standards, you start pushing yourself. And I think they do a good job of showing you, like, when you excel, things are actually easier. So there's like, life is so full of paradoxes, right?
Sure.
Like, the more you think of yourself, the less satisfied and usually less happy you are.
Right.
If I pursue happiness, if I pursue money, if I pursue, selfish things, I never attain them. Even if I attain them, I want more. But when you start putting other things above yourself, you actually end up A, better, and B, happier. So when you serve others, when you're doing something for a bigger purpose than you weirdly become better and more fulfilled. I don't know what the science is behind that. Maybe it's all headspace, but
Sure.
and I feel like the military does a good job. They physically strip you from a lot of the things you'd identify with your identity. They attach you to kind of they give you values. They tell you, like, hey, these are the military values. At the point of being an 18 to 22-year-old, no one's thought about their values or life purpose. You're just going, hey, when's my next good thing?
Yeah.
So the Army just force feeds you that. They beat it into you. And then, they start putting you through kind of escalating levels of physical, mental, social, emotional challenges. And what happens is, as you meet them, and you do meet them, most people do, you start realizing, just like I did as a 17-year-old, like, whoa, I can actually kind of kick ass when when failure is not an option, like I can do pretty well. And then you start to crave and hunger for that. And then you're like,
Yeah,
okay, what
totally.
else? What
Right.
next?
Yeah.
That's kind of what led me down my journey where it was always like, oh, what else can I do? How else can I serve? What's the next challenge, the next level? I mean, I turned 50 this year and I'm still like, all right, what's challenge
It's
look
still
like
the
in
same thing.
2024?
Yeah.
So
Okay, so
yeah,
what was the toughest for you? By the way, you don't look a day over 30, man. So good job on that, man.
God bless you. I knew I liked you for a reason,
Couple of
Manny.
those couple of those gray whiskers. And listen, if I grew mine out like yours, mine would show too, brother. So trust me, I get it, man. But
We
aside from
just became best friends right there.
hey, man, I got to give a man a compliment where it's due, right, brother? What was the toughest part for you in those early days? Was it the physical stress? Was it the mental? Was it I'm very curious because, and I'm asking that, I think, because I think that there's probably a decent, and you can correct me if you think differently, a parallel there in somebody going into, per se, the entrepreneurial world and trying to get a business going where they're going to have to fight a lot of that social, emotional, not physical necessarily, but mental warfare in order to keep making progress, similar to when you first jumped into the Army and you were a lost 17-year-old. So how did you handle that? What was tough for you in the beginning? And maybe you can share some sight on how others could make it through that same initial friction point.
So when I first went in, it was actually pretty easy. I mean, once you get over the fact that, oh, these people aren't coddling me anymore. We grow up in a pretty soft society for the most part.
Yeah, totally.
Especially in the West, if you're middle class or above, like life, you probably have a better quality life than we've ever had. We're not used to being offended or pushed against. We all go into our own echo chambers where we hear what we want and see what we want. So once you get past that initial piece, it's all pretty easy. Everything's laid out for you. So I'm going to actually fast forward and say, especially for an entrepreneur, someone who's stuck their neck out and said, okay, I'm going for it. That's much more similar to someone going into special operations. Someone who's, there was someone I actually executive coached. He was a 30-year-old chief of IT for an amazing company, and he really wanted to serve. And now he's actually wrapping up selection to go into Ranger Regiment.
Wow.
Like he very deliberate, intentional. He kind of did the whole divorced himself from money, from prestige, from the world, and he chose a hard path because that was his path. It's not right for everyone. It was right for him. It's been really neat for me to stay in touch and kind of hear his journey. But what is really challenging for someone like that, or for me when I went through some of these different, Green Beret selection or whatever it was, is there's always an easy out, and it's just sits there calling your name, especially when things get hard, right? You're getting up, you're filled with self-doubt. Man, everyone here is better than me. Everyone's kicking ass. Man, I feel like I'm the last person on everything. I shouldn't be here. You get that inner doubt. And then you're like, I could just step away and go back to my old job. I was really good at that. I can just go back to this or go back to that. And to be able to recognize that voice for what it is and go, that's not my best path. Like acknowledge it. Like, hey, that's part of us, but that's not the best part of us. And how do I ignore that and go, you know what? I might not make it. I don't know, but I'm sure as hell not going to quit. My business might not succeed. I'm having a tough time right now. This is hypothetical. Stuff's going great for Stonewater, but I'm just saying, like, when you find yourself in that place, it's real easy to be like, I'm just going to go back to working in the Amazon. Like I was a manager in a warehouse, it paid great, I had good benefits, it was easy. But you're like, no, man, you are where you are for a reason. Shelve that thought and go, okay, it's tough, but what's the next thing I can do? What's the one little thing I can do to, throw a line in there for that big fish, to improve my product, to do whatever it is. And that's kind of how training was. It was real easy. I remember once, probably one of the most challenging screening events I was in. I'd started off not where I wanted to, and I sort of fought my way up to the top of it, and I was doing well. And on probably the hardest day of training, I blew my knee apart. I remember sprinting down this hill, I had a pack on my back, and I slid on some wet rocks and hit my knee, and you just knew, you're like, oh, that was bad.
Ooh.
I'm like, was that an ACL, a PCL? I don't know. I'm not a kinesiologist. All I knew is it was really bad. And it was one of these things, like, no one said, "Oh, you're hurt. It's okay. Come
Mm,
back later." It was like, "Well, are you quitting or are you staying?" Like
wow.
it was that kind of event.
That direct.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. It's
not
like,
that this is I got to jump in because this is so powerful what you're saying right now. This the Western world, as you acknowledged, this is not, oh, it's okay, take a break, go lay down, let's go to the doctor. No, no, no,
yep.
no. You're saying that are you
It
done
was
or are you
like,
going forward? There's no
yeah,
option in between. Ah, it's
yeah. It was
so
like
powerful.
legitimately one of those things. Like, hey, yeah, you might have severed a tendon. I don't know. So are you out or are you in? Like, it's on you because, obviously they're preparing you for when you're in combat. Like,
Right.
you can't go, hey, I got a shot in the shoulder. Like,
Right.
this really hurts.
Right.
I'm out. Time out. Time out.
Yeah.
There's no time out. You have to execute. And, and I remember that happening and me going, and I remember in my head going, oh, I guess I'm done. Like, I'm just done. And sort of in my head going, okay, so do I go to grad school? Like, what do I do now? And I'm sitting there with my knee, swelling up really fast. I'm on this rock. I'm in a lot of pain. I'm in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, well, I don't know what tomorrow holds.
Hmm.
I go, so I don't think I want to quit right now. I'm just going to get up and keep walking. I'm going to be moving slow. I'm going to be limping, but let me just drag myself through the next day. I'll try to wrap it up and we'll just see what happens. And I remember doing that and just the way things worked out. And I had no idea what the next day held. I actually ended up getting a little bit of rest. I got some, anti-inflammatories and, again, no one cared that you were
Mm-hmm.
hurt, but I
Mm-hmm.
just was like, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to keep going until they pull me. Like, that's all I told myself. Like, I'm not going to be the one to cancel myself. I'll
Fascinating.
let someone else tell me when I don't make
Yeah.
it. But instead of someone pulling me, what happened is just as how conditions worked is I was able to brace it, get it a little better. The course kind of slowed down for about a 24-hour period. And yeah, when things started picking up in intensity again, I was slow, but I was fast enough. And
Mm.
then you start getting this mind over matter. All of a sudden, I'm starting to override the pain. It was soft tissue damage. It wasn't anything structurally broken. And so I was able to mentally power through it and end up finishing the course and, went and serve in an amazing organization. But had I, done what I felt like at the time, which is like, oh, I'm done. And I had
Yeah.
a total reasonable excuse. Like,
Totally.
dude, this is a bad
Yeah.
injury. Like
Yeah.
you're jacked up
Yep.
and your brain's like, you keep going, you could make it worse. You could be crippled for life. You could get gang, your brain's telling you all these awful things. So you've got this reasonable excuse. It's just calling your name. It's just going, come on, man, just ring the bell. Just step aside. And to me, that's the hardest thing, whether it's running your own business or training for an Ironman or, staying in a tough like every relationship's tough, right? And like, it's always like, oh man, you know what? Enough's enough. I'm out. Um, there's always an easy out. Whatever it is, when you're pursuing your best self, that easy out, that reasonable excuse is just hanging there and it's going to keep bugging you. And sometimes you just got to look and go, shut the hell up.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
take the next step and go, I'm not done. If the situation doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but I'm not going to be the one to quit it.
Hmm.
And I think that muscle is wickedly powerful. So
All right, man.
hopefully you heard something there. Cause
we-
again, I kind of went all over the place. That's what happens 3 coffees into the morning.
We can cut the podcast there, man. I think we got everything we needed right there in that short little snippet. Man, I
All
mean,
right.
that for me personally, individually, the reminder and the understanding about the mental grit in that moment. Because look, there's been days. I mean, and even as I practice my evolution, I've always thought about, something simple, not even nearly as close as blowing out a knee, where I would subtly stop doing what I was doing or quit or adjust or like run from it over the years before. And it was always about, what am I doing? Why am I doing that? How weak are you? Why are you being soft? Why? And this is self-talk. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not going to help me over time. And you drawing out that to a physical place, it makes a lot of sense. I guess I have a question around that though, Phil, because, in that moment, obviously you're probably pulling from all of the standard and value of all the work you've been doing in the military up to this point and the constant repeating of the values, the mission, the vision. So when you're having that conversation about, I'm done, what am I going to do? And you're talking to yourself, if you don't have all that support from the other efforts of the military, you probably choose to quit.
Yeah.
Do you agree or disagree on that?
I do. Yeah, I think because I would see this, if you're doing it for yourself, if you're doing it to prove it to yourself, if you're doing it because you want the position or you want that, to show the world what a badass you are.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you get in those times, it's not worth it. And you quit. And I saw that over and over again. Yeah, I saw people who were far more qualified than me pull themselves out of training because they didn't think they were going to be the best, or they thought they were not even that they were injured, that they thought they might get injured, and that just wouldn't work for who they were. And I remember asking one of these folks, I'm like I get it. You're concerned about the potential injury in this program, and that's totally valid. Lots of people do get hurt, but you're pulling yourself out before you even are injured. Go, what would I want to be on a helicopter in Syria with you going into combat against ISIS about worried that what if the helicopter might get shot down? What if we might get hurt? It's like, dude,
there's no time for that.
Like, look about the job you're training for. I'll tell you, I'd love to share another story on this same concept.
Please,
I think
man.
There's one that's even more powerful than training. Can
Bring
I do
it.
that?
Of course, dude. Are you kidding? This is your show, man. I'm just here to bring it along.
So just when we talk about the concept of battling that negative self-talk, that negative talk, like our human brains focus on problems, right? We think about what can go wrong and how bad can it go wrong. And that probably kept us alive for hundreds of thousands of years. It kept us from getting eaten by the cave bear when we went in to wonder what that strange noise was or whatever. But now in 2024, it's by and large, our brain doesn't know the difference between a cave bear and like a rough day at work.
Right.
So we get ourselves in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember, so I was leading my special forces team on a mission. This was April 6, 2010. So the anniversary was just a few days ago. And I was thinking about it. We actually went out on a reconnaissance mission. This was in Northwest Afghanistan. It was a mix of Green Berets, some Marine special operators, and Afghan commandos. And we were going out to verify if the enemy was in this location. We were told they'd emptied out all the civilians in a village, and we were going to do some follow-on operations. And we're like, well, let's make sure that's accurate, because if it's true and there's no civilians there, we can fight in a very different fashion than if we have to be more surgical and precise. Right. So we went out on this mission, and there was no civilians there. And matter of fact, we were so successful that we accidentally, and I really mean it, we accidentally found like the enemy headquarters for this entire region. So this relatively small reconnaissance force bumped into the regional headquarters of the Taliban in northwestern Afghanistan.
Wow.
And they were having a meeting that night, and it ended up being an enormous, imagine fighting inside like a strip mall. Like it was about that size.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was a compound, and we're fighting inside it. And they call all their reinforcements from around us. So we're fighting to clear this strip mall while we're getting surrounded by more and more enemy.
So let me jump in to make sure, because I think that you're using the word fighting very loosely. You're talking about full-blown guns, shooting, bombs probably going off, right? I mean, you're talking about full-blown warfare type stuff.
Yeah, I mean, up to the point where literally I'm on one side of a wall with 3 of my folks, and there's 6 Taliban on the other side of the wall, and we're throwing grenades over the wall at each other type
This
thing.
is unbelievable, man.
That level of fighting.
Yeah.
And within about 10 minutes, I mean, just to give you an idea, we had, 7 injured, 1 dead of our element. And, the enemy had their share as well, too. And that was within a very short time. And I'm the ground force commander. And so I'm kind of going like, wow, this was not part of the plan, not to this degree. We knew there's always a chance of contact. You're always prepared for it, but we were not set up to get in a full smash mouth game of a ball, especially not against a numerically superior enemy.
Sure.
So but it's okay. We're the U.S. Army, right? I'm a Green Beret. I've got all these tricks in my sleeve. So I start reaching into them, and first off, I'm trying to medevac my guys out, and the medevac helos. It's 1 a.m. They're getting. They're under a lot of pressure coming in. The enemy doesn't know they're medevac. They just know helicopters.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to shoot anything.
Right.
So they do 2 turns. They pull out 2 groups of guys, and then they're like, hey, we cannot come in there anymore. Like, the situation's too hot. We've got issues. They're like, look, please find another way to evac them out. And I think there was some fuel and weather issues too. It was no ding on the crews there. And we were in a very remote location. So it wasn't like other folks could surge up quickly and help. So number 1, medevac's gone. I'm like, okay, so anyone hurt now, we're carrying out. We'd walked in about 3 miles. So whoever's hurt, we're carrying back out,
Wow.
well under pressure from the enemy. So number two, we go to use air support, which weather came in. So we've got these low, heavy clouds over us. Aircraft overhead can't see through the clouds, and we're in too close to the enemy to really effectively drop bombs. I mean, at some point, some of our Afghans were fighting hand to hand with the Taliban. Like we were in that close proximity. So we can't do the things we traditionally do. We can't start dropping bombs to change the equation. I'm pretty heavily outnumbered. So the third thing, I reach back and I call out for reinforcements. We had what's called a quick reaction force ready to go. Their job's to come out and save us, the cavalry, if you would. So I call them up. It's a mix of Marine special operators and some other folks. And they come flying out of their base 3 miles away. They're in some armored vehicles and they get about a mile out and all of a sudden, boom, they get blown up and attacked.
Wow.
So now I have no air support, no medevac support. My reinforcements got blown up and they're like, yeah, we're in a bad way. Like we're in a fight. Can you help us? And then to add to that even more, the Afghan commander, we had about 30 of these Afghan commandos with us. He comes up to me and he's like, Phil, he spoke broken English. He's like, I don't want to concern you right now. We're very busy. It's a bad night. But the Taliban is talking to my commandos saying, if we turn over the Americans, they'll let us live. So the Taliban was talking to the Afghan commandos we were working with saying, hey, we'll let you guys live. Just give us the, 8 Americans that are with you. And, no harm, no foul. Like we'll do what we want with them. So I'm sitting there and I remember kneeling by a bunch of wounded folks and by this mud wall, same one where you've been throwing grenades back and forth over going, man, this is all gone to hell. Like we are going to be a front page news article tomorrow. The Green Beret team goes disappearing with Afghan partners, Northwest Afghanistan. And in your mind's just going all the bad situations. And I remember just going, wait a sec. I can't control any of that. It's that same mindset of don't quit, right? Like part of you is just like, I can't do anything. Throw your hands up and just, it's over. And we're like, look, there's got to be something I can do. What is the one thing I can do to move things in the right direction? I remember taking a knee, there's explosions, the wounded are yelling, it's night, it's on the radio trying to get all these different assets to help. No one can. And just pulling out my pocket, I had all these different playbooks, basically like saying, hey, when you have wounded, do this. When you need air support, do that. And it just gave me some structure to thinking. I was like, okay, what? I can't do that. I can't do this. Okay, what can I do? All right, let me see if I can just get away from this strip mall from hell. And if we can get some distance, maybe I can drop a bomb on it. And that'll give us some breathing space. And so we gather our forces, we sort of clod our way back. We got 106 yards away. I remember looking at my watch, we were in some ditches, and then we felt like we were far enough away that we could drop bombs, on this enemy headquarters building. And we did that. And that was like the first thing, right? Like now we're starting to take positive action. And this compound, gets blown up. Part of the deal was I had to go back and take pictures of it after the fact, because now we're about 6 a.m, the sun's starting to come up. And higher headquarters is like, what? You're describing a crazy situation. Like you guys are surrounded, but you're fighting a building. Like that doesn't happen a whole lot where we're at that much a disadvantage. They're like, look, we'll let you drop through the clouds, but you got to take pictures to prove, there's no civilian casualties and it's a clean hit and all that. I'm like, yeah, I'll do whatever right now. Like I'll do anything at this point. So I remember after we dropped the bombs, the sun's up at this point, me and like 3 or 4 others like sneak up there to take pictures. And so we've got one of my guys has a camera out and the enemy shows up at the same time. They all have guns. We're sitting there taking pictures and they're looking at us. And I think they're like, what are you idiots doing? That was part of our deal. And then we got out of there very quickly with, the Taliban all shooting at us. But it's like this classic picture I've got where you see 3 of us running, one guy's holding the camera, and there's this blown up, strip mall in the background, for lack of better words. But we did that. And then we're like, okay, so that bought us a little bit of breathing space. And now the enemy all of a sudden is like, whoa, hold on. They're dropping bombs. That's a game changer.
And the bomb came from air support? Is it?
Yeah, it was air support.
Okay, got it. Okay.
I think it was like F-16s or something.
Oh, wow.
Or F-15s. It was actually, it was
okay.
this really cool. I think almost all female squadron of F-15 pilots came out of Bagram. But
Wow. And you're
yeah,
only
so
100 yards away from that.
we were like 106 or 116 yards. We were in like a irrigation canal or ditch, so we were undercover, but we were really close.
Wow.
And again, one of the guys had a helmet cam, and you see like rocks and dirt and stuff falling on the combat controller, the Air Force guy talking as he calls it in. Like you can literally see everything happening. But it was a dynamic change. So we took that one small step, we moved off it, we put some pressure on the enemy, and all of a sudden it was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, different ball game. They didn't stop, but it definitely changed things. And then we kind of fought our way to our reinforcements who had come out. And now we were linked up with them. So even though we still weren't in a good spot, there was like 3 times as many of us. And we brought our wounded with us. And then, things just one step after another kept changing. And what had been a really, really crappy night ended up being a pretty pivotal moment, because as much as we got punched in the face that night, and we did, like I said, I think at the end of the night, we had 13 wounded and 1 dead was our, what we had suffered.
Wow.
But the enemy was several times that in that region. And it had been a very significant dynamic shift because they thought they had us on the ropes. So they all came out, which they rarely did. They exposed themselves. And once we started dropping a few bombs, we were able to drop a whole lot more because we sort of got a feel for the play, and higher headquarters had confidence in us. And so we did some heavy duty damage. And even though we had to go back, lick our wounds, and we came back out 3 days later with a much bigger force that was designed to clear the area, it ended up being a pretty significant shift in that whole area for years and years after that. Anyways, but it was that whole concept of your mind's going down that negative route, going, we're screwed. Like, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to happen. This business plan isn't going to fly. And you just want to let go and turn away and look out for yourself. And really what you need to do is just go, hey, got it. There's a lot of shitty things happening right now. But what's the next best action I think I can take? And you might be wrong. You might take and be like, oh, that was not it. But that's okay. Then pivot. What else? And if it works, okay, how do I do this more? Build that momentum. So it's, like I said, it's funny. I talked to you about the knee injury story. Then I'm like, wait a second. I was training combat. We had a similar situation. Failure wasn't an option, but at the same time, if you get in that negative talk and start panicking and spazzing out, and as a leader, doing the wrong thing, it can go real bad real fast, versus just pause, take a breath. Okay, what's the next best thing I could do? Let me execute.
The courage that you have to be in those situations like that with bombs and guns going off. And again, I joke sometimes I think there's different levels of courage. For example, I have no problem selling stuff. I sell stuff all day long, and it's easy to me. Other people will never pick up a phone because they're terrified to make phone calls. Then you got the guy that goes and climbs up the Empire State Building and walks along a small little balance beam that's about 6 inches wide and no harnesses or nothing. I'm like, that son of a gun's courageous. Then you have somebody that will go do a cop, and you got you guys that were doing duties like this. I don't understand how the differences work in the individual's mind. I wonder what you think about how the muscle of courage needs to be enacted or utilized in circumstances, because dude, for you to keep a clear head and be in that war zone, literally, it's unimaginable to someone like me. I hear you, and that's why I'm leaning in, and I want to go in some more. And you see it in the movies, but to be in that, come on, man, help me out here.
So I think you're spot on, though. What you're saying, where you're like, hey, I have no issues picking up a call and making a sale, offering something, asking a price, sticking to it. That literally, when I do that, I'll get nervous. I'll totally back down. I'll caveat. I'm like, oh, you know what? Hey, let me, So that night, like on April 6, 2010, first off, like, failure is not an option, and you're so in the moment that fear is really not allowed to be present. But it's also something where, let's see, I had been in the military for almost 20 years at that point.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
you'd been mentally rehearsing, training, going through it, just like for, for you for sales calls, interactions, working with people. That's a muscle you have very well built. So for me to go back in a firefight, I and I don't know, maybe some people would disagree with this, but I think a lot of the folks who are pretty senior special operators, it's a job for them. It's a calling, and I think they're courageous, but that's their comfort zone. Like they excel in those environments. When a explosive breach kicks down a door and they're clearing a room and they're rescuing someone or taking down some threat. That's their bread and butter. That's what they're comfortable with. Now you take that same person and you go, hey, I want you to stand up in front of 100 people and share your whatever life view or
Uh-huh.
blah blah blah.
Do some public
And they'll
speaking.
they'll turn white as a ghost. They'll throw up a bit. It's funny. I'm working with a football team right now, and one of the assistant coaches. We're running a lot of training events for the team, and I like to do experiential training. Teach them something, then put them through a scenario that
Mm.
reinforces it, and then discuss it. And so some of these scenarios are kind of complex. You're going outside, you're rafting, you're climbing, you're doing whatever. And one of the assistant coaches he was a professional football player. He's big, beefy, was a linebacker, amazing person. When he has to stand up in a room, and because he's kind of like the lead coordinator with me, when he has to stand up the room and brief 20 other coaches, he's like, man, he gets nervous, he sweats, he does this stuff. This is a guy who's played on any given Sunday in the pros, and he gets nervous to talk through a PowerPoint with 20 coaches, all of whom respect him.
Mm-hmm.
That's his courage. For
Interesting.
him throwing on a helmet and going up against, someone who's 275 pounds, Detroit Lions that wants to rip his head off, he's like, bring it.
Mm-hmm.
But then to go up and talk for 5 minutes and tell people what to do and where to go, he's like, oh man, this is nervous. For me, the sales, like for real, the sales call, the business piece, like that's a new muscle to me. So I think everyone's courage looks different. I teach mental toughness, and it's funny because a lot of us think mental toughness is doing hard things that I like to do, just doing more of it. So I'll work with athletes and they'll keep turning up the dial on more and more intensity. I'm like, yeah, you're mentally tough, but you built that muscle. That's a very established muscle for you. Now, performance, yes, you have to keep elevating it. But I go, you're not getting mental toughness from that anymore. You have to find something different that's out of your comfort zone. Alex Hall, the free solo climber guy, like in climbing, he's not maxed out. I don't think he ever maxed out, but he's like very high in that level. His mental toughness is going to be like, man, now I'm trying to parent or do something else.
Sure.
And I don't know him. I'm just saying theoretically, but I think courage is the same thing. It's different things to different people.
That's a great point that you bring up right there. It made me think in a mirror type of a way where I look back at myself and I think about, and I'm asking you a question on top of this, which is there certain things that you would advise or practices that you would suggest to evaluate once you hit that sort of pinnacle in something that you're familiar with to go explore? And you just mentioned the parenting thing. And I know this because recently we became parents and now he's 18 months and holy shit, did it challenge me in a bunch of different ways. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I learned a lot about myself that I didn't know before. And that's one way of getting stronger. But is there something that you can go out and proactively decide to get into maybe that you would think would be wise because you're doing this so much and it would challenge people, it would test them to advance and evolve mentally in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, I encourage folks to kind of step back and assess. I think self-awareness is key, whether it's for personal mastery or leadership, just being like, okay, where am I at? Where are my strengths? Where are opportunities for growth? What do I naturally avoid? And is that good, or is it some areas I should explore? And I think it is good to step back and look at that and be like, okay, what are, I don't think it's like just do something you're not good at. Like I don't think it's that simple.
Right.
But I think it's what is it that you want to try that you've always told yourself, like, I could never do that. I could, that's not my jam. I'd love to, I wish I could, those things that in your head you tell yourself and you never actually do it. That's where I'm like, that's where you want to explore. For someone to just be like, well, I suck at this, so I'm going to do it. But they have no desire. They've never had an inclination. They're just going to be like, yep, I still suck at it. I don't like it. There's not a lot of value to it. But when
Sure.
someone's like, you know what? I really wish I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I hear a lot about it. I see a lot about it. It looks interesting, but man, I could never do that. I mean, I'm out of shape, or I'm not a fighter. I'm not this or that. That's where I'm like, there's something there. Now to someone who's like, yeah, I never really have zero interest, like that's not my jam,
Mm-hmm.
then that's probably not your thing. Or
Sure.
the person who's like, oh man, I can't believe you do triathlons, or you did a trail race or an ultra. Like that'd be so cool. I could never do that. I wish I could, but I never could.
There it
I'm
is.
like, oh, that's something there.
Mm-hmm.
Or, your entrepreneur example, man, I'd love to start my own business. I'd love to do this. I'd love to, when you find yourself saying, I wish, or I love to, and then you say, but
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, that's where you want to explore. Um,
That's solid. I like
so
that.
I think
Yeah.
those are good indicators. I was coaching one individual, and he was awesome. He's a MD psychiatrist, top performer, really hungry, looking for ways to grow. And he kept pimping me. When I executive coach people, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just trying to ask questions and build perspective and see what you want to do and how you want to do it, and be an accountability partner. But he wanted to challenge himself and grow, but he didn't. He's like, I don't know how. I don't know how. And he kept asking me to basically give him stuff to push him. And I'm like, why? Man, I can't do that, man. I'm not you. I don't know where your thing is.
Mm.
And we tried it a few times where I'm like, well, if I were you, what I know about you, I mean, what about this? And he would try it and come back and he'd be like, no, that's not it. And it's one of those things where it comes from within. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, if you're like, man, I wish I was more like this, or I wish I did that, or, that's where I'm like, there's some windows for growth in there for you.
Yeah. Oh man, we only have so much time. I remember you telling me you got a whole team of kids now, right?
Yeah. 8.
8. That's right. So I'm glad you said it because I was gonna open that up there. The man has 8 kids, so he's got almost 2 basketball teams going. I think you've got almost one more for a baseball field.
Yeah. Getting close.
You're there. But you got a solid single basketball team, so that's good. Soccer team too, I think, right? I
Yeah.
think
Got
so.
subs and everything.
Yeah, man. So, how does and I'm asking this selfishly because I am raising a young man now, and we have very much locked into newfound values and principles and a family philosophy and so forth. How do you begin to put that in place with the family and the kids and the wife and let them start to, and I'm imagining that you have those codes of conduct, so to say, because you are the military man for so long. You understand how that helps to shape you. So what's your process for implementing that in your family? And you might have because look, I was honest. Like, I mean, my wife and I are on the same page. She's a big blessing. Sometimes we disconnect from the value, and I got to bring it back to the value. And it's like we're learning, right? We're always on the grow. And so I'm curious on your process there to make sure the whole team, when you got wife, you got young ones, you got different emotions, different ages. How does you, as the father, implement something similar to the military without upsetting the family or pissing the mom off or whatever this could look like? I'm extremely curious what your answer is going to be here, man, because I think you probably have something really good.
Yeah, no, I'm curious what my answer is going to be here too on this, because I'll tell you right now, this is definitely not a doctor-patient or professor-student relationship. This
Mm-hmm.
is, hey, you're a student raising an 18-year-old. I'm a student raising 15 to 27-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
So full disclosure, I started my family young. I think I was 22 when my oldest daughter was born, and so I was still very much in react mode, just trying to figure life out. So I did not set up, I feel, a intentional structure for my family or raising kids. And so for my kiddos are adopted. They're totally amazing, but they joined our family at older ages and stuff. So, and my kids are all a lot older now. So we didn't have, I wish we did. I wish, we had talked about family values and
Mm,
structure. But we did not have anything firmly codified and established. I used to always, especially when the kids are fighting, be like, hey, it's about love and respect. Love and respect. If you can lock in on those two, everything else is going to buff itself out. Love being, hey, you're putting others above yourself, you're giving each other grace. Respect meaning you acknowledge they're different than you, have a different story, different values. Now, I said that about 4,000 times. I don't know if it ever sunk in a one of them, but to me, a lot of it is, yeah, if I could go back in time, if I was older, if I was raising an 18-month-old, my wife and I were on the same student music, I would love to be like, hey, this is who we choose to be as a family. This is how we strive to live. Just like any organization,
hmm.
these are our desired purpose and values. It's what we're about. Um, because I didn't lock into that stuff till my kids were teenagers and beyond.
Mm,
I've got a daughter, he's getting close to 30 now and getting ready to make me a granddad. So
sure. Wow.
you start to have different dynamics there. So I think a lot of what I work on now is am I modeling it and living it? And then am I looking for those opportunities to effectively communicate it? Because like if I go into my 17-year-old daughter's room and go, hey, let's talk about your life purpose and your values and how that plays out. What are your roles and your goals and the habits you have on a daily basis? She's just going to give me that look like, and she'll probably ask me to close the door on the way out and then
Mm,
lock it behind me. So it's ironic. I think it's really hard to message those effectively to those closest to you. So to your best friends, the people who've known you for years and years, your family, your best friends, the one closest. I think that can be a challenge as we grow and develop it. I think you have to live it by example.
mm.
It's ironic. I think one of the best examples, though, the ones I'm most proud of, as far as carrying values and purpose forward, is kind of with my wife. So we've been together for 24 years.
Yeah, she's been through the whole
Um,
thing with you, man. Yeah.
we've been through some pretty tough times, and I remember we had on paper what was, in my opinion, the perfect life. I'd retired from the military in 2019. We lived in Bozeman, Montana, which is paradise to me. She had a great job as a physician assistant. She's getting paid well. I'm retired military. Kids are just doing awesome. And I remember I was reading a book called The Last Arrow, and it's essentially saying you got one life, send it. Like don't hold
Mhm.
anything back. And I truly was like, I feel like I've done this. As a matter of fact, I was struggling going, what else? And so I was doing the leadership development piece and I was outside and I was working with folks. But I remember talking to her like, is, is this the life you want? Are you happy if today's your last day going, this is it? And she had wanted to be a doctor, when we first were together, but, lost her mom right at that age, going from undergrad to med school. So that there was a lot of turbulence and churn there. I was deployed all the time. We started having kids at a young age. And that was a dream for her that kind of went on the shelf. Now, she was a physician assistant, still a provider, amazing job. One that, frankly, I would far prefer over being an MD, just because the flexibility and other things. But that was not her dream. And I remember talking to her like, you got your one life. Is this it? Like, are you ready to just put your stamp and say, yeah, this is my story? And she's like, I always wondered what if. Remember
Mm.
that whole I
Oh
wish,
yeah.
I woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, huh. And so my question, this is, here I am coaching my wife. Don't ever tell her I said that. But going, well, I mean, you want to be MD, why not? She's like, well, I'm 41. I have a great job. We live in a great area. We have 8 kids, which there's, that's a bit of a time commitment. Like it doesn't make sense. And I'm like, well, says who?
Hmm.
Well, it just doesn't. Like it's not realistic. I'm like, why not? It's like, well, because this and that. I'm like, well, I mean, I'm your partner. I'm willing to support you. I mean, what would be the next step? She's like, well, I mean, I could take the MCAT and just see how it goes, the entrance exam for med school. And so she did that and got a decent score. It's like, okay, what else? Well, I guess I could apply to schools. She applied to schools, ends up getting into her dream school. And it's like one step leads to another.
That's awesome.
And now she's about 10 months out from being a full-blown MD doctor.
Wow.
Again, that's her journey, her path. But I loved it because it was that whole concept of, always on the grow, right? You got one life, send it. Uh, are
That's so
you
good.
are you living your fullest life? Which, by the way, I'm not saying like I have no desire to be an MD, which is ironic because my undergrad was in pre-med. That's a whole different story. I wanted to be a forest ranger. I won't even talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's just the bio program they had at the school I went to. But for her, that's her journey. That's her path. For someone else, it could look very different, but it's at the end of the day, hey, are you living life that's consistent with your purpose? Is it embodying your values? Are you striving for those fullest goals? And I think if you can say yes, it's a life well lived,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're a kindergarten teacher or a garbage man or friggin' world dictator, like whatever it is. We have different paths, but live yours to the fullest.
Yeah. I gotta have to pick up that book, man. That sounds quite amazing. I always get jazzed up when I hear that, and I love the reminder because every time I hear the reminder, even I remind myself regularly. It's very much a part of my operating principle, which is like go. And I say that, and I also was talking about this the other day. My mom passed away when she was very young from cancer, and so I think she was 32, and she didn't get a second chance. And then I always tell a story about when I got sober. I think I told you this briefly. When I got sober, I was just before my 30th birthday. And so what clown I would have been if I would have went out and started to disrespect the time that I got a second chance. And so now it's like, okay, motherfucker, let's go, right? And let's figure out how much we can conquer, what we can do. And I ain't shorting down on that. That's just like, I'm all in because I always think back about my mom. Mom didn't get a second chance. Right. And so, that when it's that close to you, you look at life differently and it's go time. So if anybody's ever wondering what fuels certain people, that's what it is for me. I'm curious, your reference point on, because I know and I appreciate you being candid and honest and having a level of humility with saying, hey, look, I missed the boat on that, right? We didn't necessarily apply some of that stuff in the early days. How would you advise the enforcement of some of that stuff, though, in any case, right? Because I think that you can write it up on the wall, but then that doesn't mean anybody's going to follow through with it or necessarily be that person, sort of as you referenced earlier as well with the company that focused on, hey, here's what we are, here's what we do, and then they're living it in complete opposite. So how do you manage that part for the individual evenly to march forward according to those values and those principles?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's what I like is that question I can't answer. When it comes to, hey, how well do I implement it in my family today? It's like, well, we live it by example. It's kind of under the current. We do talk about it a bit. But again, trying to get a 16-year-old to buy into that, sometimes you just get the eye roll. They're like, whatever, Dad. What I love is I'll talk to different sports teams and some of my kids will come or they're, and they'll listen or I'll have them help me do setup. And then they'll hear me talk and be like, that's really good stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I've been telling you that for 18 years. Like, come on. No, so this applies to whether it's, to yourself as an individual, to an organization, if you're like a business leader or even to a family. And I think that, the three arenas, you can use the same principles. Number one, understand, hey, what are we about? What's our core purpose at the end of the day? And be able to articulate that. A lot of folks are like, yeah, I live a purpose-driven life. And you go, what is it? And they're like, shoot, I don't know. And I encourage them, like, try to put words to it because that gives you direction. So who are we as a family? Hey, we're love, fun, and support, or, whatever that is, name it. Secondly, so you've got kind of what your purpose, what you're about. And it should apply to whether your kid's 18 months old or they're 65 years old. Like, this is who we choose to be. Secondly, so that's kind of the why we exist as a family, a business, or an individual. Purpose and why, same thing. Secondly, hey, what are the core values we want to define our thoughts, our words, and our actions? And these are like ideal, not what we're actually doing, but what we want to. So, for example, I use the example love and respect, right?
Yep.
Kept it real simple. Just two things like, hey, guys, love and respect. That's what we're about.
And the thoughts,
so
the words, I'm sorry, so I caught that correctly. So
thoughts, words, and actions.
Actions. Okay, so love and respect.
Because there's this misconception that you are your emotions, you are your thoughts. And in reality, like that's a reactive state of thinking. You can step back and be like, wait a second, why am I so offended and upset? Like, I don't have to be. I can let that go.
Right.
So I try to remind people, like, step back, have a name for it, and then
Don't,
refer to it.
don't call
But
somebody a
once,
bad name with your action, right? Like that's part of the love and the respect part in the action function of what you just
exactly.
mentioned as the value, right? So it
So
guides
you've
you.
got 100%. So you've got kind of your why or your purpose is articulated. You've got your how, your values laid out. And again, Phil Kornachuk's family, like we're all over the place. So we keep it simple, love and respect. And then you got to have some sort of mechanism to reflect and enforce it. Meaning, when you see something happen that embodies love or respect, like, oh my God, like
Mm,
you went and totally, you went and picked up your sibling. Like we didn't even ask you to, you just did it. Or, I've got, my one daughter who won't give me the time of, I won't say won't give me the time of day, but she's a 17-year-old daughter and she's way smarter than me. So if I try to tell her this stuff, she just kind of eye rolls. But then I'll watch her take her two younger sisters out thrift store shopping, or they'll
mm,
go like literally just go have a picnic in this park nearby, or
that's
just do really
awesome.
cool stuff.
Yeah.
And like that is love right there.
Hmm.
When I see them stick up for each other, or I'm like, that's respect. So you don't just name it, but you recognize it when you see it. And I'd say like, hey, if I was working with younger kids, and we did this a little bit when our kids were younger, is ask them at the end of the day, you're sitting around the dinner table, like, hey, 8-year-old Manny, like, how did you live love today? Give me an example,
Mm,
you know, or how could you have? If you're like, I didn't, I sucked today.
yeah.
Okay, whatever. Like we're human. Where could you have? Okay, how do we do this tomorrow? Give me an example of respect. Did someone show you respect? How did you show respect? So you're building that like, oh yeah, this isn't just fluffy words. These are real things. Now with businesses, it's that same thing. I'm like, hey, if you tell me integrity is important to you, then you better be freaking highlighting when you see it. You don't chastise someone when they correct an error that would have actually made you money. You go, hey, I know, we ate a couple grand on that, but I just want to call out Manny for recognizing this, acknowledging it, owning it. And, that's integrity in action.
Amen.
Um,
Amen. How,
so
let
again,
me,
family, business, self. For me, my purpose and values are part of my morning routine.
yeah.
And even at the end of the day, I'll wrap up and reflect like, hey, did I embody these, the values I choose to live by? And if not, how do I change that tomorrow?
I love that so much, so much. How do you enforce it if someone breaches or breaks or compromises the value in action or thought or whatever? So the kid goes out and they disrespect or they're not loving in the moment. Are you the father? Like, and I'm curious if you had these examples also in the military where if you breached the value, what was the consequence? How was the course of action to correct it?
So I'll go with the military example because that's where I really started learning about a lot of this culture stuff.
Hmm.
And it wasn't on my younger levels. It was when I got to the most elite levels that the top performing organizations knew it and nailed it. And whenever they deviated, there were serious consequences. When you ever sacrifice, values or purpose for performance in the moment or immediate results, it circled around. And I
Mm,
mean, I think business is the same way, right? Like you can make money quickly, but can you make it ethically over long term and maintain your brand and
right,
integrity?
right.
So there was a military organization I belonged to, and they basically define their values as these are critical for success. The absence of these values leads to failure, and we hire and fire off them. And they did. I knew they really got value, and I saw them let go people who had 10, 15, 18 years in that organization, but would breach a value, for
Mm,
example, trust. And it wasn't always, like some egregious error, but it was something if they're like, hey, man, this was a clear breach of trust, or, we failed to adapt here, or there's a distinct lack of commitment. They would acknowledge it, address it, and they would release people from that organization. And everyone else was like, oh, this is real. And it wasn't this weird punitive, like, it wasn't a negative thing. They did it with love. If I can say that, which is funny when you think of them, it's elite special operations organization, but they did it with love. They did it with respect, but they also held to the standard. It was, classic firm but fair. We see a lot of organizations that have very high standards for junior level employees, meaning the cop coming on the force, going through training, the MBA intern, whatever it is. like we're real strict on them, high standards, show up on time, you better have your pay, everything's got to be
Mm.
locked tight. But then the higher levels of the organization, the CEO shows up late to a meeting, the COO doesn't meet a hit time. We just kind of turn a blind eye and make excuses. The organizations that embody culture, it's consistent across the way. It's like, no, the standard's the standard, whether
Mm.
I'm the founder or I'm the newest hire. And we take these serious. And, at the most extreme example, I saw where they'd let people go if there was a breach of values. I'm working with a team right now that has some great performers in the field that do not embody their values. And this team I'm working with is identifying, hey, who are our leaders as we scale and grow? Who do we want
Mhm.
taking this team to the next level?
Uh,
And there's always a tendency you want to pick the ones who crank out the best numbers.
Right.
But I'm
Right.
like, is that the person? Do you want to, do they model who you want to be?
Mhm.
And are they getting the numbers the right way?
Yeah.
And it was interesting because they were like, you know what? This person who has slightly lower numbers, but is consistent and does it in the right way and leads within the organization without friction. That's who we want leading.
Mm.
Not the person who they crank out good numbers, but
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
questionable means at times. So,
Right.
yeah.
Man. All right. Well, before we keep going, man, I want to say I'm enjoying this tremendously. This is the I wish we could talk for days, but we can't always get everything out in a single conversation that would and I could ask a million questions, quite literally. I bore you to death with the questions that I ask, but I'm fascinated by all the answers you're providing, trust me. So, in lieu of time, I do want you to be able to share anything that may be outstanding that you think is important or that you didn't have a chance to really touch on, or maybe something that's surfacing in your mind right now that is important to know or to understand or that's near and dear to you. And then I'm grateful for that you decided to show up today, man. Obviously, it's a big deal when you've got 8 kids and you've got a business you're running, you got family and all that stuff. So I'm extremely grateful for that, brother. So I just want to say thank you. I appreciate that. And then I'll ask you my last question before we wrap up, man.
Yeah. Man, so first off, no, I appreciate the opportunity. I mean, it's an honor to talk to you, and even based on our phone conversation, I was like, this is going to be a blast. Whether it becomes a podcast or it's just two guys talking, one of them with an amazing blazer on, like you. But
I got to
and,
bring my
and
Vegas swag, man.
yeah, I love the Vegas swag. No, and this is a great excuse. I put a sign on the door like "Do not disturb." Dad's in a podcast, so I can hide my office. So you actually give me a break from these
I love
eight
it.
eight werewolves I call my children. But no, when
So,
you talk, we've talked about family, we've talked about the military, we've talked about business and leadership. I think just one core thing is it's really easy to get fixated on everything else around us. But remember that, hey, it starts with you, man.
mm,
Like, but it's not about you. Meaning the only thing you have control over is kind of your intention. We don't even control our own health, right? Like I could get diagnosed with cancer
yeah,
tomorrow.
yeah,
I trip down the stairs and I'm getting old. Maybe I'll break a hip. Like who knows? But I control my attitude. I control how I choose to interpret the events that happen to me. So it starts with you, but it's not about you. And if you can tap into, a purpose that's bigger than yourself. And I'm not saying like, hey, we've all got to be Malala or, it's not all about position and changing the world and fame, but like, hey, what is your niche? What do you love? What do you got some talent, some gifts, some passion for? Where's that opportunity to live it? Like you can tap into that and just go full bore down that road because it plays out family
mm,
life, business life, personally across the realm. When you have a clearly articulated purpose, and you got defined values, that's going to resonate through everything.
yeah, man.
And
Yeah,
it's funny because it's super foundational and fundamental, but it's also something that so few of us ever take the time and effort to articulate. I just, working with this Stillwater team, we finally put together a package we feel like it's pretty good for walking people through how to identify, define, and then live those, purpose, values, your roles, your goals.
yeah,
But just remembering like, hey, you want to lead well, lead yourself. And it's really hard to lead yourself if you don't know where you're at or where you want to go and why you're going there. So starting there and moving from that. I mean, I guess that's just one thing that's an underlying theme when we talk about hey, what led you to perform at this level, or what carried you through tough times here? And it's because you're tapped into a purpose bigger than yourself.
Yeah, I
You
can
do
tell.
something more than you, and that gives
Yeah,
you untapped strength.
sure. That's powerful. The one-liner that you gave there was a internal shock, and it was, and I forget if you said it's all on you, but it's not about you. How'd you say that exactly?
It starts with you.
It starts with
not
you.
about you.
It
Meaning, we're
starts.
the only thing we actually have
Yeah.
agency over is our mindset and our attitude and our choices. But at the end of the day, it's not about us. If you choose to have it about you, you're just always going to be a hamster in a wheel. You're never going to be happy. But you start pouring into things bigger, more meaningful than just yourself. Hey, you're more fulfilled. You make a difference and impact, and we grow there.
I love that. I love that so much. I've never heard it that way, pieced together, where I always look for triggers, like where I can just say something to myself and I instantly like, okay, I'm in control of me, but I got to think about my wife. Okay, I'm leading here myself. Okay, but I got to think about my kid. It's not about me. Man, that is a dynamic sentence of words right there, man. I'm going to write that one down when I get out of here and reinforce it regularly, man. Back when I get home and at the homestead, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. And what I love is it's even beyond that, right? Like it's everyone listening to your podcast. It's the people you're going to interact with. It's clients. It's
You're
teams.
darn right.
It's whatever. So
I'm going to take it and I'm going to use it. And I'm going to say, man, I did a great podcast with Phil. This is what he told me. You need this, right? So it works so well like that, man. It's so true. I always say that people I work with are always, I've pulled out all kinds of different knowledge from elsewhere and it's kind of distilled through and I'm sending it back out to them, man. So it's a big working circuit, I guess you could say. Not circus, circuit. All right, brother.
I know both well.
Hey, I know. There's actually a circus named after my last name, Circus Vargas, man. I don't know. So we used to joke. We used to joke about that. Where can people find you? Where are all your handles, domains, websites, any of that good stuff that we can redirect people back to so they can come get some stone water?
Yeah, I mean, it's stonewatertraining.com, all one word. We're on Instagram, it's on LinkedIn, and our website's got a lot of, whether it's working with individuals, working with teams, just because of the volume of work we've been getting. We just started like some online courses, kind of pretty low barrier to entry. It's the same material. Like when I talk purpose, values, roles, goals, habits, building a structure, routine to start and close things and stay locked in on what matters. We put all that stuff there. So yeah, that's where you can find us. And we're always, open to input and suggestion and looking for purpose-driven, value-based individuals and organizations to get behind. So
love it, man. Love it. And I think the thing that we talked about on the phone was how much you're leaning into the experiential part where you go out and do stuff. You're walking through the wilderness and a bear comes at you or some shit like that. It feels like, take a deep breath.
Ideally not. Ideally, you're looking at it across the field going, I hope it doesn't come at me. But I'm a big believer. I think people remembers what it's stories, songs, and experiences. And I've got stories for days. I'm never going to sing for you. And then, the experiences, we try to design them where, for example, we had like an adaptable leadership course. We were talking all about, hey, as leaders, how do we build that ability to adapt and adjust to the environment? There's tons of great academic material out there, but then we put people in environments. We had them in the city streets in Portland. We had them up on the side of a mountain in Whitewater and leading each other through all these scenarios. And they're doing stuff that in the moment feels like, oh my God, I'm just got to get the team through this physical or technically arduous event. But the reality is when we stop and debrief, we go, hey, do you recognize that same process, that same mental muscle you used is exactly like when you're leading your organization and all of a sudden, your call for capital falls through and you have to adjust and adapt, or, we sort of work through, build the parallels and then transfer it into their respective fields. So that's the experiential piece. They'll remember that.
Yeah.
If I give you the best knowledge in the world, you'll remember maybe a fraction of it or a catchphrase or buzzword. But if I have you going through an experience that is very novel, unusual, triggers a lot of emotions and intensity, that's going to be locked in.
It's going to stick. Yeah.
So we try to engineer them, very intentionally on that. And,
I love that, man. Good.
Yeah, it's a blast.
I'll have to figure out how to get to one, man. All right. Hey, I'm in queue.
Well, save a seat.
That's
for
right,
it.
man. That's
My
right.
spring and summer one are sold out, but I think I'm putting together one for the fall that's
Okay.
going to be pretty badass.
Yeah,
so,
let's keep the conversation rolling, man. Let's keep it
for
going.
sure.
All right, brother. Last question I got. What does always on the grow mean to you, my man?
Always on the grow to me is sort of the epitome of personal mastery, meaning I'm content with where I am, but I'm striving to evolve and grow and get 1% better in all these different aspects of my life, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, socially. So that's always on the grow, is just loving the journey, and never ending, but that's the beauty of it.
I like that sentence you started with, man. The epitome of personal mastery. Damn, that was fire. I always try to figure out what I can strip out and start to, maybe test out on a new tag or evolution of always on the grow, right? Whose contribution here at that question ask is going to be the one that gets the placeholder?
Who makes the cut? Yeah, I'll run with it, man.
Yeah, man. Hey, brother, I appreciate you, man. Hopefully you have a
Likewise,
beautiful
man.
day.
Thanks for what you do.
Yeah, man, we're gonna rock again here pretty soon, man. I'm definitely enjoying this with you, and I want to definitely bring you back at some point so you can keep adding some compelling insight here on the journey, man. I didn't get a chance to ask you a million of the questions I want to about combat and all that stuff. It's, you know how it is, man. It's hard to get into all the depths there when there's so many unique angles you can go into and discuss. But dude, I am extremely thankful you joined us today. And until next time, brother, have some fun out there, my man. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you, man.
God bless, man.
Take care.
All right, brother. Bye.
Awesome.